Welcome to Recross the Paths, where we celebrate the Cube community one conversation at a time. My name is Cade. Today, I get to sit down with Brandon. Brandon, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
I am further stoked that we're connecting across many, many miles, perhaps more than usual. If memory serves, you are currently far, far to the east of me.
That is correct. I live in a small farming community of 5,000 people south of Glasgow in Scotland.
Outstanding. And I'm in Oklahoma, so we're far enough apart that
There we go.
I think there's always something profound and special about taking this hobby thing and linking up across the globe for it. So thanks for being willing to be part of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I struggle a little bit thinking about how to introduce you in this space because you touch so many things. You're integrated with the Rocky Mountain Yetis, so kind of an old school community. You are incredibly active on Reddit, connecting people through a bunch of content there. You also manage a whole bunch of cubes and travel. How do we even begin, Brandon?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's really been where my journey has taken me, is wearing a lot of hats, throughout this hobby. It all started with old school, I will say with that. I mean, I came back to Magic after quitting in 1996 when Mirage came out, and then coming back to old school in the year 2000 with COVID hitting just like it does everywhere else. And from there, I founded the Rocky Mountain Yetis because I wanted people to play with. And so I posted up on Reddit what's come to be known as the Lonely Hearts post, and people came and I said, hey, I am in Colorado. I want to play Magic. I want to play old school Magic. Is there anybody else that wants to play with me? I had 3 other people respond, and we have been meeting up, weekly, essentially, to play. And, the group has grown tremendously to over 100 people. This is where I discovered Cube. This is where I discovered that there was more to Magic than just putting 60 cards together in a box and showing up, at a bar to play late at night. And we have a yearly competition that I still return to the U.S. for every year called YetiCon. We've added a Cube element to it. So there is, a cube competition that breaks down to a top 8 for a final cube and then gives away awesome prizes as a result of that. So it's been an amazing trip, and I've been very fortunate to cross paths with a lot of awesome people as we've gone through that journey.
It sounds like the strength of consistency there too, of going from 4 regularly meeting, or perhaps irregularly meeting at first, to having a consistent group of folks that you can lean on whenever events come up.
Yeah, it's, just like anybody says about Cube, right? That the community and the building the community is the hardest part. And, you have to be the person who blows the horn every time and says, okay, let's go, let's meet up, let's sit down at this table and let's draft these cards, because it's not going to happen for you. You may be lucky to live in a city where there are tons of people, there's tons of Cube communities, and there are people doing that for you. But everywhere that I've gone, I've been that person. And so I've learned, kind of tips and tricks along the way. Most of it involves being very annoying, sending a lot of messages and making sure that people know that you value when they come to sit down with you. But it's the cornerstone of building a group, and it's a cornerstone of being able to play Magic consistently, is that you are the person that brings everybody together into the gathering, as they say.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned old school or older formats, kind of the seed of all of this. I'd like to ask, kind of to set the stage for us, Brandon, why Cube, though?
Like I said, I came back to old school in 2020. My brother dropped off a box of cards with no notice whatsoever after I moved back, home to Colorado. And he said, here, you'll have these here when you land off to college, and then drove away quickly. I opened up the cards thinking, what the heck's in here? And sure enough, it was all of my cards from, alpha, beta, unlimited, all the way up through, Mirage, which is the last set that I sat down to.
It's amazing.
Totally. So I sat down on the carpet, cross-legged, started putting cards down and started playing solitaire against myself. And, then slowly got into Timmy Talk, slowly got into the old school vibe, and then, founded the Rocky Mountain Yetis. And we'd been around for, 3, 4, 5 months, started to grow. We were around, 10, 15 people at that point. And one of the guys in the crew, part of the core 4, the original 3 plus that joined me, he sent a message and he said, hey, does anybody want a cube this week? And I was the only one in that conversation who didn't know what that meant. So
Excellent.
Trying to be cool, just like you did on the playground as a kid, I said, yeah, sure, let's cube. That sounds great. And I showed up to play his 93-94 old school anti-cube. We play with Ante. We play with a whole bunch of cool mechanics that make it fun and more interactive. And I sat down and I cracked my first pack of 15 since, back in 1994.
Amazing.
And I got absolutely crushed. Like, I drafted the worst, white green deck you've ever seen. And if you know anything about old school, you're thinking, why are you playing white green? There isn't a worse color combination than that. And that's because I was just picking cards that nobody else was picking. I mean, literally, that's the situation that was happening.
Yeah, when your payoff is Jasmine Boreal, not
Sure.
much to do with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I had swords, and but I just sat there doing nothing most of these games, going, what is going on here? And at the very end of it, I went 0-3, didn't win a single game, not even close. I sat down and I took a long, hard look at, the pile that I'd put together. And I said, this is really interesting because it scratches the itch of creativity, and it brings out that Timmy in me that says, you know what, I really want to explore, build, and design. So that's where my heart lives with Magic. I've got 23 old school decks right now sitting boxed up doing nothing at the moment. But I've built all those decks because design is where my heart is and where my passion is. And so I said, you know what? This sounds like a bigger opportunity to organize and to create. And so I said, the only way that I can get better at this is if I do more of it and suffer a lot of it along the
way. So you took
Yeah.
your lumps initially and determined this is worth doing more of.
Well, I mean, just from that one time, and I was like, if I can put up with this brutality a couple more times, I'm sure that, I can get better at this. And this was also at a time in our small group where the 93-94 Commander format was getting much more popular. And we were all experimenting with 93-94 Commander, kind of building it out based on the original legends, plus like some of the single color legends like Sinbad, things like that. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this format that we're exploring and I'm going to turn it into a cube. And I'm going to draft it, and we're going to see how this rolls. And so my first cube was actually my old school Commander cube, which is, 500 plus cards. It's a massive cube. And, we drafted that, and it was hyper successful in that initial draft. I mean, the games lasted hours, just like a good 93-94 Commander multiplayer game should. Everybody left really tired and really exhausted, but everybody had a really good time. And so
it's like you get to draft and do maybe one game after all that.
Oh, we played one game. That's exactly right. We played one game. Yep. And then at the end of it, everyone's like, "All right, I'm going home. I'm out." And they all stacked their cards up neatly. Said, "Thank you so much for building this. This was so cool." Then got in their car and drove home and ate food. It was really fun though, because that was me taking this concept that we were playing with and making it accessible to 8+ people all at one time. And that was something that to me was just amazing.
Yeah, and that sort of thing where people then aren't responsible for bringing a full Commander deck with them. They don't have to craft the whole 93-94 Commander with that restriction. They just get to sit down and play. Well, sit down and draft and then play a very long game.
Yeah. And I think, that's really the magic of Cube, isn't it? Is that, the only thing that it requires is literally that you show up. There's nothing else, and I cannot tell you how many people I have recruited, across multiple continents that have just kind of sat there looking at me, kind of prepping the cube, laying out packs and things like that. And they come up and they say, "Oh, like, what are you doing?" And the first question is like, "Do you know what cube is?" And, you get some yeses, you get some nos, and it's like, "All right, sit down and come play with us." And the first answer is always, "Oh, I didn't bring anything with me." And I said, "That's the best part. You don't need anything. Now sit down and get ready to crack some packs."
That's it.
That's it. And that loving insistence, I'll call it, is what drives people to actually drop their defenses, sit down. And two of my most weekly attending players at the moment right now, I picked both of them up through this. The guy was on his way to the gym. He stopped off at the game shop to get coffee prior to going in to, get his pre-workout on, saw me getting ready to start cracking packs and came down. I'm like, "All right, sit, play." And he now shows up every week.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
It's so nice how there's such a draw to that sort of thing. I want you to be part of it. And also secretly, we do value having more people at this draft. But also, I do want you here to do this.
That's what I tell everybody. I was like, look, do you have Discord? If yes, good, because that's how I'm going to lure you in. That's what this is all about, is how can I lure more people to the table, by providing interesting experiences that they don't have to buy into, that they don't have to have anything for. They can just show up with, 2 hands and a brain and get playing.
I imagine it's kind of like the, samples at a restaurant if they see you setting up all the packs too. It's like,
yeah.
Do you catch the scent of what I'm working on? Well, come on, sit down.
That's it. Or, like walking up and down Sam's Club, like those free samples,
That's
man,
right.
they're a dangerous thing, right? Because once you have one, you're like, okay, those muffins are actually pretty good. I'm going to grab me a pack of that.
Brandon, I wasn't going to mention Sam's because I didn't want to lock into the region, but I guess since yeah, it is exactly like the Sam's Club
Yeah.
samples.
That's all it is. I mean, and the more of these samples that you can dole out, the more of these little micro experiences that you can create for people that, not only bring pleasure and have a really good time, to what they do and bring joy, but also provide a different type of game than they're used to. I find that it continues to bring people back.
Absolutely. First draft is free. And the next one, and the next one.
There we go. Yep.
So certainly Cube has resonated for you here. Why the retro frame? Why the old border? Why is that important to you?
I answer this question to a lot of people. And what I'll say is that it took me a very long time to kind of bring down my defenses, because like every person who is older in this world, you get invested in what you know and what you love, and that's where you then decide to live. And I started playing this game in 1994 as a kid on the street with friends where concrete was your playmat.
Yeah. Nobody played with sleeves.
Nope, they didn't exist at that time. That just was not a thing. So the simplicity of that era of Magic appeals to me highly. The nostalgia that brings appeals to me highly. And the fact that you can break out of the traditional simplicity of what constructed games or pre-modern of the era or, and the meta brings through Cube is also really, really alluring in that regard. So I've come to it because that's where I've always been. I've never played a modern game of constructed Magic ever. Because I left the game when Mirage came out. I came back in 2020 when my brother gave me those cards. I've never, ever played modern Magic in that regard. And that has been one of the biggest facets of my journey in Cube is that I have learned to enjoy, to love, and to not judge the modern cards and what comes out of playing those, to the point where I told myself I would never make a cube with modern cards, ever, for so many reasons, because I dislike planeswalkers and, blah, blah, blah. And lo and behold, I have created now 4 to 5 modern frame cubes. Now, they're all more on the niche side of things, which, that's just how I jam the game and I love the game. But they are still, nonetheless using these modern mechanics and using things that are broadening my scope of what makes this game enjoyable.
So it sounds like it's moved past some of the, I don't know, exclusivity. Is that the right word?
That is the right word. That's exactly it. Because, like anybody else who was there when they saw kind of the first thing, overcoming that exclusivity bias is really important.
Do you think that there are things that era of Magic, or we should say like explicitly the old era of Magic, is particularly good at executing or highlighting?
I think the things that it highlights best are the fact that the game had such a vast frontier of design space to evolve into. I mean, it is now known as the world's most complex game, and that started from, little pieces of cutout paper with wristwatches drawn on them for Time Walk. And it's taken something that was realistically so simple and has created just this huge megaverse of content, of game pieces, of everything else. And so with that, I think there is nostalgia and an amazing level of simplicity that these older cards and their designs can continue to enthrall people with, because I can't tell you how many times I draft my pre-modern cube when people will open a pack and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this is an old border card.
Yeah.
Like I thought this was a modern card, because a lot of the designs that we see today came from this era of Magic, just in a very different way. And so, if you really want to know how something has become what it is today, start at the beginning and see what it was, at the very start, and finding those people that kind of know a little bit more about it and know how to curate that experience well are worth the time to seek out, I would say.
I imagine your playgroup has cubes in the modern era now, or like elements of the modern design sensibility. Does that capture some of the same sense of discovery for you, of like the new things that you would have never seen?
I love this question, and this is something that I've been talking a lot about recently, because what we do every week with the number of cubes that we have, not only from myself, but from, those in my immediate group right now, is, I put up the poll for who's going to come to Cube on Wednesday with us, because that's when we run our draft nights on Wednesday. And then on Tuesday, I run a poll that says, what do we want to draft? And I put up one powered option, one old border option and one modern frame option. Sometimes those things cross over, sometimes they don't, because I have an old border power cube. Sometimes vintage cube is on the list, whatever the case may be. And then other times people say, hey, I just finished this project, would you be interested in playing it? But the point is, we never just focus only on drafting old border things. I'm not one of those people that says, nope, it's my group, it's my cube, we have to draft it this way. And the benefit of that is I have drafted some things that have shown me that there is so much more to this game. As I said, we drafted a mystery booster cube a couple weeks ago, which takes all of the playtest cards and everything from Mystery Booster 1 and 2, all the cards on the list that are reprinted in retro border, and the curator has just done a phenomenal job building a cube out of this environment, and I've drafted it twice, and I have to say, this is two of the most fun moments I've had playing cube in Magic, and it's a set that I never would have even knew about had he not brought this to the table.
Amazing. I love that too, where it's as much as we like to bring things as designers to other people, when you get to experience a dish that somebody else has put together, that can be inspiring too.
Absolutely. And I messaged the guy straight after on the way home because I had this like lazy smile on my face as I was riding back, from that draft, because those unset cards, those playtest cards are interesting because you've got things from the original sets, like you've got the Chains of Mephistopheles guy,
yes.
And things like that are all in there. And I drafted a deck with all of that, including like, the sludge monster that puts, the sludge tokens in people's deck.
Right. The gunk tokens, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, the gunk tokens. And it was an absolute blast. And I came away from that night so positively energized. I had such a good time. So as soon as he said, oh, we can always draft this again, and he put up the vote for it that week, I didn't even vote for my own thing. I voted for his.
That's so good. Brandon, one of the things that you contributed here to the Cube Space that I latched onto was you do really thoughtful reports from like drafts that you do. Well, one of the reports you put together was from a trip you took. It sounds like you travel some for work,
Yep.
but then you take your cube with you. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I am very lucky in my life now that I get to travel quite a bit as a consultant. And so I get to travel at least 4 to 5 times a year to different countries. The beauty of the old school space, the pre-modern space, and, largely the cube space is that the community is very tightly knit throughout the world. And so it's one of those things that I plan my business trips now to my clients that I'm meeting with around who I can get together to meet with me to cube when I go to one of these locations. And so
that's so good.
Yeah. I'll put out feelers to like my communities, like, hey, I'm thinking about coming like within this 3-week gap. What do we think is going to be the best time? And I'll get people coming back saying I can show up here, I can't show up here, whatever the case may be. And then once I get a call for, I can definitely, show up to this on this week, I then go back to my client and I schedule the trip to come out and see them.
That's so good.
Yeah. And so the way this usually works is, I take my carry-on, hard case luggage and a backpack. And in the hard case luggage, one half of it with the little zipper, the zip around piece contains my cube, my tokens, my dice, my land station, everything like that, all perfectly neatly packed in a very tight space, zipped up. And then the other half has clothes and everything else. And my mantra is, if you travel with more cards than clothes, you're doing this correctly. So I book the trip. I book the night before I start work with the client. When I land that day, I always take an extra day before I go on site to start working. And then I meet people that night. We'll play in a bar, a game store, wherever people normally meet to play. And then we'll take deck photos. We'll share all that. And then I will go to work for the next couple of days and then, work on writing the draft report as I'm flying home.
To set these up, I know you mentioned kind of reaching out. Is this similar to the Lonely Hearts message? Is it just like, hey, is anybody in such and such a town available or interested?
That's exactly how this works. Reddit has always been the place where I've found people are lurking, looking for games, looking for people to come in. And so I'll do exactly that. I'll go in the old school sub, I'll go in the pre-modern sub and just say, hey, I'm traveling out, to X, Y, and Z country, to this city on this date. Is there anybody that's interested in, running a cube and jamming some games? And luckily, I've gotten to the point running the old border cube sub and things like that, where my name, or at least my Reddit handle, is becoming a little bit more known. So when I post things like this up, people are now more enticed to respond and to say, oh yeah, we run a group on Wednesday, come join us and et cetera. And the best part about this is They all then become Discord friends or WhatsApp friends or Reddit friends, whatever the case may be. And I don't have to make that post next time because I say, hey, I'm coming back and so, do you want to get together? And the answer is always inevitably yes. And I don't think there's a single time that I've traveled internationally, where I haven't been able to organize and fire a full pod.
So how did this come about necessarily? Like, did you start by traveling and going, man, I need something to do while I'm here? Or was it like, I love playing Cube and hey, here's a built-in way to connect with new folks?
Yeah, it started with old school and constructed, to be honest. And I've got a really good relationship with the Berlin Elemental Blast, which is the old school crew
What a
that
great
lives out.
name.
I know, it's so good.
Old school communities have the best names.
Yeah. And the Berlin Elemental Blast, this is, just one of the best groups of humans I've ever met. And so I reached out because, I had a couple connections here and there. And I said, hey, like, does anybody play old school in Berlin? Like, I'd love to meet up and play. And they invited me out and 6 people showed up and we jammed old school games, for like 6 hours at a chess bar in downtown Berlin. And from there, I was like, okay, this is fantastic. And the same thing happened when I traveled to Singapore because and it was pre-modern instead of old school because Singapore doesn't have a huge old school scene, but their pre-modern scene is thriving. And we had 8 people show up to play pre-modern. And so from there, I'm like, okay, there must be a way to do this that makes it smoother and easier. And and Cube was the answer that I came to because people then can show up regardless of what supplies they have in their bag that night.
Did you have to navigate like language barriers as you encountered some of that?
Luckily, the places that I travel are largely fluent English speaking locations. I've not run into that yet where I've had that issue. And there are a lot of expats that live in these places as well that kind of help, surround the table. I mean, one of the guys that I was drafting with in Germany is actually from Scotland, which was very odd when we sat down and he was the first one to show up and we didn't know each other. So, that provided an interesting interaction right off the bat. But the short answer is no. I've not had any issues with that. I don't know what I would do or kind of if I would run into that. But, that could definitely lead to some interesting times. And I would definitely write a very different draft report in that situation.
Well, yeah, I was wondering, especially with something like old school, where your card pool is going to be a lot more familiar. So you have that shared experience there that may be different than some other outlets.
For sure. Pre-modern too, I would say, that it extends to that where, you could likely play a wordless game of Magic across old school or pre-modern, depending on the build with people. Now, I think Cube is a little bit different just because it's a much more custom format. A lot of my cubes have custom rules, things like that. So there has to be that degree of explanation. And I think, every cube designer deep down is actually, an AD&D dungeon master because they love standing up and talking about what the point of this cube is, how to draft it best, et cetera. So there's a little bit of that DM in every curator, I think.
I could see that. It was like the desire to play the game and also to have control over the game in a way.
Also true. Yep, 100%. Yep.
So Brandon, when you're traveling, do you like to bring your cube for other people to play, or do you like to experience what locals are working on?
That's a good question. I always bring a cube with me because what I have found is that people are excited about things that they have never played or ever seen before, especially with something like my Kantos cube or my old school anti-cube because I have real power in all of these cubes, et cetera. And so if I tell people, hey, I'm bringing a cube, it's got real power, it's a very high, level, et cetera, the line queues up very quickly. This is not to say that if somebody said, hey, would you mind playing one of our cubes instead of bringing one of yours, I would be all over that. And one of my goals is actually to travel down to the East London Cube crew next time I travel down to London on a Thursday to take part in one of their drafts that's not one of my cubes. And I was talking to them about that this week when I actually, went down to do some consulting in the city and we drafted one of my cubes on Wednesday.
And that's so encouraging, like you said, when you've done this multiple times and people know you're coming back, like you kind of get to build into that community in a small way.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm not a very good quote unquote event organizer. I put up the poll and I say, look, who's going to come? Here's where we're going to go. Like, I'll see you there. And it's not one of those things where I'm having at this point to message all these people being like, okay, are you actually going to show up? Are we going to be there? Because when I'm traveling, people are now showing up because it's a once in a month experience or, once in a year experience, whatever the case may be. And so a lot of that legwork that I do with my group at home isn't required, as I go from place to place, which is a nice bit of respite from having to be the hardcore organizer every time.
It is funny that I won't even guess what percentage of event organizing is really just that initial push of, hey, we're going to
Yeah.
show up at this time. And then from there, the reminders. But
Yeah, it is. But I mean, with local groups, that is literally how I've built every community that I've ever have is just you blow people up with messages. And when they say something like, oh, I might be there on Thursday, it's I'll see you there. That's a hard yes. And,
I'll
just
give you a
tell
ride. Like, let's go.
exactly. And just that openness, that excitement, like, I mean, it really does draw people in, and it really does excite them to come and spend time with you because what they see is that like you want to spend time with them. It's not just show up if you want to, like, we'll see you there. It doesn't really matter if you show up. It's nope. Like you've given me something that I'm calling an uber hard commitment, even if you said the word maybe. I want to see you there. I want to experience this with you, and I want you to take part. And I think the value of that energy gets missed, especially when people are getting tired of having to do that all the time. But it's one of those things that I've found just makes the biggest difference in the world. And I've yet for somebody to come up to me and be like, you send me way too many messages, I don't want to hang out with you, blah, blah, blah. And, people know my sense of humor. They know my personality after a while. So, it's less offensive, hopefully, as they get to know me better.
Well, yeah, one, I mean, not to wax too poetic there, but like, especially since the pandemic, the way people have connected has changed so much. And discretionary time looks very different. So
Yeah.
having somebody actively say, I want you to be part of this is profound.
That's what I hope for because I mean, whenever somebody says, "Hey, do you want to join me, to draft or something like that?" and I have to then inform my family that I'll be, absconding for 6 or 7 hours for whatever reason, I never use the words "I'm going to go cube." I always say I've been invited to cube. Because like each of these drafts is an event and I mean, despite the fact that only 4 people may show up, I mean, there are 150 people that they could have invited. They chose to reach out to me to provide that invitation. And so to me, like that's something special. And I try and take that very seriously. And so I feel like it's an invite, to come spend time with them, which, is a good thing when your friends want to hang out with you.
I love it. Well, one of the cubes that you have, it sounds like maybe the cube that you travel with most frequently is your Dominaria Cantos cube. I'd love to hear you speak just a little bit to this project, kind of what it is and what you've done with it.
Yeah. What it has become is nowhere near where it started. So I think I'll start at the beginning and we'll end at the end, as good stories usually do.
Excellent.
I built my first cubes, with the old school card pool only in mind. So I've got a 180 Tubert, I've got, the Commander cube, I've got my anti-cube, et cetera. And I started to see these new cards being printed in old frame, especially around the Brothers War. And I think the Brothers War is what really inspired a lot of this exploration to happen because so many of these iconic designs of both modern Magic and classic old school Magic were reprinted in this set with beautiful art, beautiful frames. And I looked at them, as they came out and I'm like, I want to try and do something around this. And so this was my first foray into the pre-modern card pool, into, these retro frame reprints, et cetera. And this cube actually started as a battle box. And what I posted it as, and you can still find the original post in the battle box subreddit way back in the day, was I want to build a draftable battle box where each person gets 90 cards or 120 cards or something and basically picks the 60 that they want to be in that box, that day. And so, the cube would have archetypes, the cube would have all of these things, the list would have this stuff, but it would bring some drafting into that mechanic because that's one thing that I think is missing about battle boxes. You shuffle it up and see what happens, which can be fun, but there's no agency in that at all. It's just you kind of hope to see what happens. So, I posted about this and people rightfully came back and said, I don't know if this idea has legs. You're trying to combine two things. A battle box isn't a cube isn't a battle box. We don't think it's going to work. And so I tinkered with it for months trying to make it work. And in the end, I'm sad to say in that iteration, they were right. And so I took the feedback graciously and I just had this pile now of cards that, had some really big, powerful banging stuff in it and, some very distinct archetypes. And I looked at it, I said, okay, well, I don't have a powered cube yet outside of, my anti-cube. Like, let's see how power works with some of these newer cards. And so, I put all the power in. I put all the mana rocks, everything like that. I don't have Ancestral Recall, in the cube. I don't have Time Walk in the cube because I think they're just overly broken cards for any cube environment that I curate. So I generally don't include those.
But you chose to add power here, right? Because that's going to change the texture a lot.
Yeah, because I mean, at this point, this was a discarded idea that didn't work. This was an idea that I tried really hard to make work, brought to the community, and the community, came back and said, "Look, I don't think you're on the right track here."
Hmm.
And so my next thought process was, okay, well then let's try something that I haven't tried before because I've already put most of the work in to get some powerful, flavorful cards in. And so at that point, I started adding all of the things that I loved in old school that I considered to be powerful, that everybody considers to be powerful. This is why, Juzum Jin is in the cube. Serendib Afrit, is in the cube. Urnum Jin is in the cube. And I wanted to have them sit next to some of these retro frame artifacts that were coming out that were also really big in the game. So things like Precursor Golem, things like Worm Coil Engine, stuff that had a very modern feel, but I was confident that I could make them sit next to each other and not feel like you had to draft a Worm Coil Engine over something like a Juzum Jin.
Yeah. So like, how did you pick which cards were going to ride that gap?
Yeah, it started with looking at all of my old school decks and thinking about like what are the things that are only allowed one of, what are the things that often decide games within their archetype, within their style, whatever the case is. What are the most quote unquote oppressive archetypes? So things like discard, hand destruction, all the things that make Magic fun for us older individuals who, appreciate land destruction. And those all need to go in there because those are the things that are going to make these modern cards feel harder to play with. And so that's really where the gap started to be bridged. And then the next piece was, okay, what do I have here that can enable these cards to work better? And so you start to look at Vintage Cube and things like that. And I mean, arguably, the most powerful set of cards in Vintage Cube are still, the Power 9, things like Tolarian Academy, things like Mishra's Workshop. I mean, all those cards are in there still for a very profound reason. And so it's like, okay, I want this, but I think things like Grief, for example, are just way, way too powerful. It swings the game, but I like Thoughtseize. I think Thoughtseize sits very well in this kind of level of power in this meta because it came from Duress. You can see kind of how it took roots, in there, what it's done. You've got Hint to Turak, and all of these things are just, they sit very well next to each other if they are built around progressively.
Did you want this to play like an old school environment, or did you want it to play like something that's more of a hybrid?
Yeah, that's a great question because choosing the answer to that question was the most important thing to bring people to the table and not confuse them. And the short answer is no, I did not want this to play like an old school environment because old school is traditionally slow. It's traditionally, a bit stodgy. It takes a long time for things to build up and move forward. I also didn't want it to play like modern Vintage Cube where, if you don't know all the cards intimately, you have no idea what you're doing.
Right.
The point was I wanted this to feel like a powerful set of games that, is akin to an environment that I was curating personally that have these things because I don't think it fits cleanly on either side of the fence. It's not an old school cube and it's not a modern cube. It's not a pre-modern cube either, because it has all the banned cards that can be considered except for Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, etc.
Sure.
And that's an environment that I sought to create that was unique to me and my cube. And that's really the best part about cube is that it can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be an old school environment. It doesn't have to be a modern environment, but it does have to be balanced in this case. And it does have to make sense to people when they sit down.
So how did you choose this one as the traveling cube most of the time?
I will ask you, how many Black Lotuses have you touched in your lifetime?
More than I deserve to, I think.
Okay, fair. And that's awesome because, I could ask this question equally to, most of the people at the LGS that I go to, and they would say, I've never seen one in real life,
right.
ever. And I have cracked this cube with 15-year-old kids who their parents talk about Black Lotus.
Right. Somebody knows nothing about Magic. It's like, well, what's the most expensive card? Just,
Exactly.
So people know it in the zeitgeist.
Yeah. And so this cube, I have real copies of all the power, all the bangers. I mean, it is a real cube. So every card that you see on that list is real. And it brings an audience that is excited to play and excited to have an experience to touch these cards that may have never had that opportunity before, which there's such a draw to that for those people who are true fans of the game. And I love being able to provide that. I love being able to be the curator of that experience. And in the end, people have such a good time because they got to have that experience.
This reminds me so much of one of your more recent articles that you wrote for the Rocky Mountain Yetis page. I think you talked about Cube as a great equalizer. There's a spot in this article I would love for you to read if you're willing to do so. I like this little paragraph just captured so much of the spirit of it, and what you're describing with the Dominaria Cantos cube, and that like what you're bringing to the table there, and then what you hope for that. Like I think it just resonated so well in this paragraph. Would you be willing to read that?
Yeah. Okay, here we go. That instinct of wanting to belong does not go away as you get older. It just gets buried under layers of identity tied to work, responsibility, and everything else that defines adult life. As Cube does with so many things, it strips those layers away. When I sit down to cube, none of that external identity matters. It doesn't matter what job I have, how much money I make, or what I do outside of the pod. I play with students who are just getting started. I also play with doctors and executives who've been in their professions for years and have seen all kinds of success. None of that shows up when we sit down. In fact, the stakes have never been lower amidst a group of people. I don't see careers, titles, or status. I see players coming to cube and choosing to be part of the same experience.
Brandon, I love that so much. And like to hear you describe, certainly with like a powered cube where you're bringing that to people who have never seen it, but it just puts everybody, regardless of where you've been before that, regardless of what your day has looked like before right now. Well, hey, now we're all in the same spot and we get to enjoy something together. Like this is so good.
Thank you. My first article that I wrote talked about my journey from old school constructed into cube. And I think the rallying point of that article where I made the jump from constructed into cube was when I found that cube is a net zero environment. And what I mean about a net zero environment is all of the barriers that normally separate people when they play Magic, whether it be financial gatekeeping, whether it be, the ability to put together a deck out of what you have at home, whether it's, just owning cards to begin with or not. I mean, all of that is stripped away because when you show up to Cube, there is no expectation of anything. You're all starting from the exact same place. You're all pulling cards from the exact same box, and you're all looking at the same cards as you pass them around the table. Now, this doesn't mean that there will be, some deficit. I mean, obviously there are people who are more skilled drafters than others, but that's something that can be learned. That's something that you can improve on and has nothing to do with the pieces of cardboard that are in your hand. I've never had a conversation at the cube table where someone says, "Oh, well, you brought a tier 0 cube deck and I only brought a tier 2." That doesn't exist because I designed the entire cube to be a tier 0 environment. And if you got beaten tonight, let's learn how to draft this better. Whereas the tier 2 matches were super fun and, the games were janky and, the style was relaxed. And it removes all of those barriers that frustrate a lot of people when they play this game. And for me, as soon as I started playing cube, all of these issues that I felt in constructed vanished overnight. And that's what made cube such an appealing concept to me. And this is why I'm such a positive force trying to bring this to as many people as possible, because it breaks down so many barriers.
And Brandon, you've clearly thought so much about cube as a concept or like learning and understanding the game as a concept. And I appreciate that you've then taken the step to write about that so much through the Rocky Mountain Yetis website. What inspired you to start writing about that?
There's a few things, to talk about here. My first degree was in Eastern European history, and I left home when I was 18 to travel to the UK to go live in Scotland and study at the University of Edinburgh to pursue a teaching career. And history was what I was passionate about. When I arrived here and started my degree, I very quickly learned that I was not nearly as smart as people told me that I was or that I thought I was. And a big piece of this came to the fact that I struggled to communicate my thoughts and ideas cohesively in a written format. And the tutorial markers were brutal with me about that. And I learned a lot. From that point, I had a stigma, about being just a not very good writer. And so it's something that I've always been passionate about improving as I go. And there's another member of the Rocky Mountain Yetis. His name is Jim Wallace, and he also has been posting up articles on that. Him and I kind of trade one off, as we go through posting. And he's been writing for a long time about this game. And he is, a hyper intelligent individual who communicates his ideas clearly, succinctly, and just so well over writing. And honestly, it was the same thing that brought me to Cube. I read his stuff and I said, you know what? I can do this. I have to practice. And
Mm.
the written word for me has a lot of power because of just how I've learned, the education that I've had. And that's how I've interacted with things since I was little, was reading them to understand them. And I'm one of those people that would rather read a set of instructions rather than watch a YouTube video.
Yeah.
So the power of the written word to me is very strong, and it's a place where I can express my ideas hopefully better nowadays. And I've had some huge inspirations from friends of mine that have paved the way and shown me that it's possible.
And it sounds like you've worked to maintain a pretty active schedule on that too, that it's something that you are writing about once a month nowadays, right?
Yep, I post my draft reports every week that I draft an all border cube. And if I draft two in a week, like I was lucky enough to do this week, it will likely take the spot of not getting to draft one next week because we're going to play somebody else's cube in my group. And then so those happen weekly. And then, I publish all of my daily posts on the all border cube sub. And then I write these longer, hopefully more cerebral articles, once a month. So I start kind of in the first week of the month with a basic idea, hammer it out, outline it, et cetera, for final publication by the 7th of each month.
I really appreciate the level of commitment and like the dedication that takes, because it's not just like, oh, I suppose I'll write something here and there. Like that's a pretty regular thing that's just becomes part of your day, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a person who loves routine. I mean, if you see my calendar, at work and in my personal life, it's one of those ones that's a single color, throughout, kind of the morning
Yeah,
to the,
yeah.
to the evening. And I do very well, with structure and purpose in that. And the responses that I've gotten from people who have been reading my stuff, who have been joining the communities that I've put together, who have been playing my cubes. I mean, it's, I write for myself because I love, to communicate this way and I love to, put this content out. But the people who read it and then come back and tell me that they like what I'm writing, it makes it worth it because we are in a niche corner of a tremendous hobby. And so the more that we can spread this word and the more advocates that we have to get out there and tell people about what we found, the more people we can draw into that niche, and lure them in. As I said before, it's the key.
I know, I love it. And I really appreciate that the article that we referenced here a moment ago, titled Faith Before Evidence, Navigating the Layers of Fun in Cube, was just a delightful read. Delightful in the way that I have also had scraped knees, and so reading about some of the things you were challenged by in that process is really encouraging. I do have to ask, not to spoil the article, are you still skating?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. I have got one of the best skate parks in the world here in Dalry. It's just a single mini ramp that's, about 4.5 feet. It's not vert or anything like that. And yeah, I try and shred a couple times a month when the weather gets good. Now I live in a place that rains 368 days a year. So, the times aren't often the best. But for example, I've got a work trip in Portugal next week, and we're staying in a surf lodge, and they have a bowl there. So I'm taking my skateboard for sure.
Awesome.
So I'm gonna go shred the bowl when I get there.
So cube in one bag and skateboard across your back.
And actually, I am taking a cube to teach some colleagues how to play Magic, whether they like it or not. So yeah,
That's so good.
that's happening. Yep.
There's a quote in this article that I wanted to ask you about. You talk about kind of this push to enjoy the process even when you're not visibly improving. Do you find that takes work, or is that something that you are intrinsically motivated to do?
This is one of the biggest things that I got out of the interview that I talked about with, my friend Cam, who was part of that article, in that I spent 45 minutes with him just talking about his thoughts on Cube and his experience, because he joined DLM, Denver Limited Magic, about the same time I did. And while and this varies for everybody, is what I'll say. That's the first and foremost thing. But for me personally, I am an extremely motivated person and I have a very high threshold for pain. But this took a lot of commitment, to kind of stay at it and keep going, with these better groups of people, as I started to draft outside of my typical old school and kind of pre-modern crew in that way. And there were a lot of times where I asked myself, like, why are you still doing this? Like, why are you showing up every week? Why are you driving 45 minutes and leaving work early to go draft these cards that inevitably, you just get crushed 0-3 every week, and it doesn't feel like you're getting any better. And so, motivation and that desire to get better at it certainly plays a huge part. But That's why the article's title is faith. You have to have faith that it's going to pay off, before the evidence starts to present itself that it is. And, I thought long and hard on that title because it really goes to your question of, what does it take to stay at it? And it took a lot in certain situations, especially because during that time in my life, there were a lot of very challenging, difficult things going on that led to some personal issues and stuff like that. And so it was a journey for sure.
Well, and we won't run through the whole article. I'm going to encourage listeners to read it. It is well written. You capture your ideas well, and it's been really good to read. So I'll have that linked in the show notes below.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of the other things I wanted to note on your writing, I think you noted you're active on Reddit. You are always facilitating discussions about picking the best art for different cards and cubes, like running pack one, pick ones, connecting with people through various conversations. I wanted to highlight in your draft reports, you do something that's really cool that I'd love for you to talk about. Rather than reporting records, you report how each deck played. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. This will start with an admission. I don't actually ever remember what the records of people's decks are. That's largely why it's not in there. Occasionally, you'll see some of my posts that have them, and if I do really well, I know what my record was. But I don't sit here and kind of write down all the records and stuff like that because at the end of the day. And the reason why I don't remember this stuff and the reason why I don't make more of an effort to document this stuff is because for me, that's not what Cube is about. I mean, look, going 3-0 is really fun, and I've gone 3-0 several times. I've gone 0-3 several times. They both feel very different at the end of the night. But at the end, it's more about exactly what you said. It's, how do the decks play out and what works? What synergies did people pick up on that I never saw in my own cube? And I love to write about that stuff because that's where, for me as a curator, I discover how I'm going to make cubes in the future, things that I need to tweak, things that I need to fix. So it's a way for me to go through and explore what people did, what their thought process was, what worked, what didn't work. Because, I mean, how many times have we as curators designed something in a cube where we're like, oh, this is just chef's kiss perfect and it's going to work out great. And this is just going to dominate. And then everybody's like, well, this archetype is terrible. It doesn't work. And you need to go back, start over from scratch. And I've gotten that feedback, because I thought, wow, this is going to be great. And sure enough, it was not. So writing about the experience that people had playing and what the games looked like and felt like, to me, is more important than just talking about a record because, I mean, there's so much content out there that talks about competitive Magic. I mean, we are spoiled for choice in watching people play, watching people do really well at the game, et cetera. And that's not what our Cube Nights celebrate. Our Cube Nights are about having a good time, coming together, spending time with friends. And when you go 3-0, you get a congratulations, you get a high five, and everything's good. When you go 0-3, it's, oh, tell me what happened. Like, why did you get land flooded 17 games straight? How many lands did you put in your deck? And sometimes people say, well, I had 23 lands in here and I'm playing, 56 cards. It's like, well, next time I wouldn't do that.
Here's an opportunity to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Here's an opportunity for growth. Sure enough. Yeah, so I think that people resonate more with understanding what happened as opposed to what the end result was because they weren't there. And a lot of these people don't understand what all these cards do because they're not familiar with them, which, that's also a big piece of this. Because I know when I read a modern Cube draft report, I have no idea what's going on. So
that's so funny to think about. Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, when people talk about all the cool stuff that's happening with what, Minsk and Boo and this other stuff, I'm like, isn't Boo a hamster? And I have to go and I have to click and I have to read all this stuff. And I'm like, I sure wish they would have talked a little bit more about what made this so sweet rather than Rakdos beat everybody. And so I try and make it as approachable as possible to every audience in that way.
Well, Brandon, there's been so much ink spilled about trying to make losing fun. And it strikes me that this is the sort of thing that helps capture that spirit, where it's less about, oh, you went 1 and 2, and more about, hey, what was the cool thing your deck did? Or what was the thing you were able to execute that made your night better? Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's so much ability, like I said, to go out and find content around what the best cards are in Cube, how to build a good land station, what there is to making a great cube and things like that. What I find that there is less of is content that helps people navigate that journey, not from a skill perspective, but from a feelings and a journey perspective. And I think that positivity is something that plays the biggest part in all of this from anything. And, this is why, like in the old border sub, like I don't, downvoting is not encouraged. We don't let people come in and say, well, that's a stupid pick, anything like that. And while it may feel like, we're running an elementary school in terms of, how we think about people's feelings and things like that. I mean, this is the stuff that keeps people coming back to the table, and the positive experiences that they have, reaching out. And I mean, the courage that it takes to post something, asking a question that you have no idea about in a room of experts, whatever that word means in this context. I mean,
Right.
that takes courage, and it's hard. I mean, I remember, I agonized over the Lonely Hearts post before I put it out there. And, in the end, it came down to, look, I have thick skin, whatever people say, it's going to be fine. But look, it doesn't matter if you're behind a keyboard or live in front of people. Like, people don't like it when other people are mean. It's just a golden rule. It's one of those, like, treat others, as you want to be treated. And I think that I always strive to create environments where this is the main point. And I wish that there was more of this throughout this community, because we are so small. And those that are out there, especially on the Cube Reddit, who do provide positive encouragement, positive comments, and really dig down to figure out what's working, what's not. I mean, these people are valuable like gold.
Well, Brandon, as we trend toward wrapping up, I want to ask a couple of wrap-up questions for us.
Sure.
So as you think to so many of the things, as a prolific designer yourself, what advice would you want to share with other designers as they're thinking about their own projects?
The first one is really simple. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be afraid to put something together that's not going to work. I mean, some of my, most played cubes are things that were failed projects at the beginning, and I moved on to something else and rebuilt it. So you should definitely not be afraid to put something together and try it and see if it works. You can't be afraid to take cards out of your cube, because if you are, your cube will always stay the same. And, I think Andy Mangold said it best from Lucky Paper: I can always put the cards back in.
That's right.
I mean, it's, that's one of the best quotes I think he's ever come out with. And, for me, what I do is I've got a little black deck box that I don't put any other cards in except cards that I take out of my cube. And they perpetually sit in that box until I decide that they're never going to go back in again, or until I slot them back in again.
Ooh, it's like a little cube limbo.
Exactly. It's if we talk about the Cantos, it's purgatory. It's cube purgatory. So that's a big piece. And then lastly, like, be creative. Don't be afraid to try something that nobody else has ever tried. And now that may not come with the most like, oh, this is awesome, I want to try it, and I want to experiment with it. Test it out with real people. See what they think, because in the end, a cube looks very different in spreadsheet form than it does when it's on the table in front of you. I played with my all gold cube, my TLDR all gold cube this week, and it's every card printed with the exception of, I think 15 or 20 that were printed from Legends all the way to all the cards that we have today that have been reprinted in retro frame that are gold border.
Amazing.
And one of the guys playing, he's like, this environment is not balanced at all. And, I looked at him and I smiled and I said, it can't be. That's not the design principle of this cube. It's impossible, because I have Jasmine Boreal in here next to Cascade Sliver.
Right.
So that's how this works. And that's okay. That's why I designed this cube, because you have to navigate the chaff and the bombs to figure out what's going to happen. And everybody had a great time. We've got great deck picks. I can't wait to post that draft report next week. So yeah, it's, not everything has to be spreadsheet perfect. Not everything has to be balance perfect. It really depends on the objective you're trying to come out with.
That's so good. I bet that's a kind of a brain melting picture to look at with all the retro gold cards.
Yeah, it's difficult. People look at it and they're like, "Oh, you mean I have to read tonight?" And it's like, "Yeah, you do." Sorry.
You get to read.
There we go.
Well, Brandon, before I let you go, I do want to ask one of my favorite questions, which is, if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick and who would you have do the illustration?
I have two different cards here. And the reason I have two is because one of the things that I do for every drafter who joins our club and then leaves after a given period of time, or anybody that comes and visits us internationally to draft with us and seeks us out, to come draft, is I create an altar for them of a card. And it always has something holding or sporting a Scottish flag. And that's what I paint on the card with my paint markers. There are 3 different versions of cards that I use that with. So, the kind of 6th edition counter spell where, the mage has got both of his hands up and it looks like he should be holding a blanket in them.
Sure. Yeah.
That's one. The second one that I use whenever I go abroad or when somebody comes, to visit us is the original consecrate land, because it's got the priest with his hands out where it looks like he should be holding a flag in them
Yes.
across. And then the last one is the pre-modern version of pearled unicorn, where I paint the Scottish flag so it looks like what a saddle would sit on top of its back.
That's so good.
So I paint a Scottish flag on each of these, and I write down like the day, the time, and the event, that they came to, anything like that. I give these out as prize cards when we run, any of my cubes for YetiCon or things like that. And I would love for these cards, if I could create a special version of this, would be Anson Maddox. And the reason why it's Anson Maddox is because he's attended a few YetiCons. I've gotten to know him and his wife, Brenda, and he's just on another level as far as I'm concerned, both as an artist and, just as someone who was such a part of this game from the very beginning and has done just some amazing things for it. And for me, as a child who thought Sengir Vampire was the coolest card I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah, those images stick with you, right? Like they're so evocative.
Totally. So if we do like a Fallen Empires thing, right, where I get 3 cards, all illustrated differently, that would be mine. So, it'd be either the Counterspell, the Consecrate Land, or the newer Pearled Unicorn with a Scottish flag in the right spot.
Outstanding. That's such a great answer, Brandon.
There we go.
Well, this has been a treat. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to share so much of your experience here and what you're working on. Certainly you have a whole lot going on. As we noted, there are many, many places that folks can connect to you. Where would you like us to point people if they want to follow up on some of what you're doing?
The Old Border Cube subreddit is definitely the right place, which is just r/Old Border Cube. I mean, I'm there every single day. I take DMs, I take everything. We talk cube nonstop. We also have an Old Border Cube Discord that we draft online together. So, I mean, we've got thousands of people around the world right now that we're cracking old frame stuff with all the time. So if you want to learn more, you want to come, check out this niche part of a niche hobby, come check us out.
I love it. Brandon, again, thank you so much for your time, for your passion. I'm so excited about all the things you're putting together. Looking forward to reading more of what you're writing. And you better believe that if I'm ever in your neck of the world, I will stop by and we'll draft some cube together.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, thank you, Kate, for taking the time to speak with me. And yeah, I mean, we always have an empty spot at the table. So if you're ever over in Glasgow, hit me up. We'll make it happen.